My name is Sarah Yeager. I'm a senior program manager with ICMA, the International City County Management Association. One of the projects that ICMA supports is the Solar at Scale program, which is the program that is hosting today's webinar. We are very excited to be joined by some great panelists to talk about the development of large scale solar and some best practices and information that may be helpful for local governments to know as they're being approached about these projects. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar and it will be available along with this slide deck after we conclude today. The recording and presentations will be sent to everybody who has registered, and then it will also be available on the ICMA YouTube channel as well as our energyready.org website. So a lot of opportunities to, if you miss pieces, if you have to leave early, if you have coworkers who would like to view this, a lot of opportunities to watch the webinar after today as well. As I mentioned, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and indicate kind of where you're joining us from today. It's always good to be able to kind of understand what our audience looks like and what parts of the country you may be representing. We also have the Q&A box enabled, so if you have any questions that come up while we're going through the presentations, we are going to hold all questions until the end of the webinar, but we should have about 20 minutes to cover those questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get to quite a few questions. So feel free to pop them in the Q&A box as we're doing the presentations, and then we'll ask them all at the end. And then lastly, just for accessibility concerns, if you would like closed captionings to be enabled for this webinar, that function is enabled. You just have to turn them on your own individual screen, and there should be a box at the bottom of your Zoom window that says show captions. As I mentioned, we are very excited to have a great group of panelists today for this webinar. Just to start, I will cover a little bit of information about the Solar at Scale program and some of the resources that we have available. And then we have three great panelists. They will all introduce themselves as they begin their presentations, so we won't introduce them quite yet, but are excited to have them join us today. And then, as I mentioned, we will have a significant portion of the webinar held for questions that may come up during the presentation or related to, again, the development of large-scale solar. So the Solar at Scale program is a program that is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and it is a project co-led by ICMA, the International City County Management Association, in partnership with the American Planning Association. So through the Solar at Scale program, we're able to offer a number of resources and guidance for local governments, again, as they are trying to understand how to best approach some of these large scale solar projects. So we have again that guidance. We have a number of education and training opportunities, such as today's webinars. We also have a whole host of other webinars and educational materials that have been developed over the past few years of this program that are all available on the Solar at Scale website as well. And then one of the main resources developed by the Solar at Scale program is the guidebook, which we have included the link here. You can also just kind of do a Google search for Solar at Scale guidebook, and that is the comprehensive resource that really walks through all of the main things that local governments may need to consider or want to consider when thinking about large scale solar. And with that, within the guidebook, I won't go too deep into the Solar at Scale program or all of the resources, but just wanted to highlight a little bit of the layout of the guidebook and what is included in that information. So we have a number of modules that are included within the guidebook, and again, really build upon each other to be able to provide a comprehensive look at what local governments may need to know or want to address when they're talking about solar and large scale solar development. So there are modules that kind of lay the foundation. Again, what are the basics? How are we defining large scale solar? What does the market around large scale solar look like? It then builds upon that to look at what are some of the opportunities for large scale solar development, community planning, land use planning, zoning regulations. How do these things interact with large scale solar? And then what are some of the additional opportunities for action at that local level and within local governments. So how can local governments promote the growth of their local solar markets, maximize the success of these projects, and the partnerships between developers and the local government themselves? A few of the just key highlights, kind of messages, overall themes of the guidebook and the solar at scale resources are: large can be a very context specific definition. So we present a number of different ways to think about what large scale solar is in your individual communities. And then also recognize that, again, especially from that local government perspective, there may be different benefits and trade offs for large scale solar. So understanding how to identify those benefits and trade-offs and weigh those benefits and trade-offs for your individual community. And then as communities and local governments are approaching these projects and these conversations, understanding how and why vision should kind of guide the strategies for the development of local large scale solar, and then also how those strategies and the development of those strategies can impact the outcomes of your local solar goals. So those are kind of the, again, across those modules that we have within the guidebook, kind of the key framing and key messaging that we are consistent throughout the guidebook and the solar at scale resources. Again, the guidebook is free and available for anybody who is interested in accessing that resource. The link is here as well. Also, all of the solar at scale resources, again, prior trainings and webinars, any other educational materials, are all also available for free via the solar at scale program. That program is winding down at the end of July, so we won't be creating new materials or new webinars, but all of the history of things that have been created will still remain live and be available for your use. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Tom Murphy, who is going to do some of the kind of level setting, discuss some of the higher level ideas of what local governments need to understand or be thinking about when it comes to large scale solar. And is Tom on? I thought I saw him pop in. Seems like Tom might be having some technical difficulties. While he tries to get that sorted out, maybe Omar, we will just skip ahead to your presentation, and we can come back to Tom as he's able to straighten that out.
Absolutely. Hang on 1 second. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep, now we're good.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Abu Daher. I'm Senior Vice President of Development with Leeward Renewable Energy, and I'm very pleased to be to share this afternoon with you all, and very honored to speak to you. Maybe a little bit about my company, Leeward Renewable Energy. We are a 20-year-old independent power producer based in Dallas, Texas. We are a portfolio company of OMERS, a Canadian pension fund with about 130 billion of investments. We are part of their infrastructure investment. And we currently operate over 31 renewable energy facilities, utility scale renewable energy facilities in the US. We have been growing, and over the last 20 years across multiple US administrations, and with continued momentum using materials manufactured in the US, such as solar panels, trackers, and supports for solar power plants. And our focus is on we have a long-term outlook on our investments, and we are US based, and we try to maximize our US content. Next slide, please. So what we do is, why do we do this? We're supporting the growing energy demand. I mean, energy demand is surging We're seeing rapid rise across the U.S. Based on manufacturing, data centers, technology, new housing. So there's a tremendous surge in demand, and there's diverse energy sources that we use, which is utility scale solar, and that increases the grid stability and reliability. We operate clean, safe, and low cost and efficient facilities. And one of the attributes of solar is that solar energy can be brought online very quickly. Construction takes about 12 to 18 months, depending on the size of the facility. Next slide, please. So one of the attributes of solar, it's that it increases the local tax revenue by way of tax agreements, such as you've seen it. You've seen the acronym of pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, and these agreements help counties to be more competitive and ultimately selected for solar projects to be invested in their counties. These projects generate significant new tax revenues for the counties, even with tax abatement agreements. And we've seen multiple examples of that. And solar projects we brings decade of substantial new tax payments, creates jobs and increase revenues for schools and county services. I think one of the most important aspects of these agreements is that there is no cost to the county or the taxpayers. Solar projects do not require water, sewer, school bus service, roads, county roads to be added as a result of the solar facility being brought into the county. Um, next next slide, please. And we've seen multiple examples of the positive impacts that solar projects have brought to counties. For example, a couple of the projects that I've been involved in Georgia, we've had tremendous success in the community by way of bringing in the needed revenue to the community. And we, as a long-term owner operator of these projects, we view ourselves as becoming part of the community on a long-term basis. And in several instances, some of the counties have had to increase millage rates, if it was not for the investments that the solar projects bring in that tax revenue to those counties. And next slide, please. We work very closely with local government as a partner. I think it's imperative. We host open dialogues. We ask the tough questions. We face the challenges head on. We seek facts and research, and we use publicly and trusted sources as opposed to social media, which tends to spread disinformation. I think one of the ways we do it, we reach out to other counties that already have solar. We bring our partner county to talk to the other counties, to share in the key learnings, to understand the impacts. And we identify land stewardship opportunities like sheep grazing, beekeeping, planting of pollinator crops, and we address the responsible decommissioning plans, so that when we're at the end of the project's life, the facility is decommissioned, and even if it's not mandated by state or local rules, to ensure that counties are not liable for the removal of the facilities once the facility is at the end of its life. So that's in a nutshell. That's my presentation, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Great. Thank you, Omar. I will then hand it over to Peter.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Sarah. My name is Peter Schmidt. I'm a director of project development with US Solar, based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Very similar to Omar, but my company works much more on the distribution side of things in the community solar space. If you'd advance one slide, we can kind of start talking about what that looks like. So the quick overview of US Solar, we've been around for just over 10 years. We were formed largely in response to the community solar legislation that passed here by the late Representative Melissa Hortman in Minnesota back in 2014. We've now expanded kind of as we've grown as a company. We have 106 operational projects with about another 200 in various stages of development. We are heavily still in the upper Midwest right now, but we are expanding to other markets like Colorado, New Mexico, California, and then some of the East Coast markets as well. A big part for us, which I'm going to talk about a bunch because it's my favorite passion project, is we do a lot of agrivoltaic elements, whether it's pollinator-friendly habitat, sheep, or we're also growing some vegetables on site. If you could advance the slide, please. There's kind of an example of those three opportunities. My favorite is this picture in the bottom left. We're working with a local farming nonprofit here in Minnesota that trains new farmers to grow organic vegetables. And they are looking for land access for long-term contracts, which is something that we can comfortably provide on our sites. So this year, this site is in Big Lake, Minnesota, in Sherburne County, just northwest of the Twin Cities. And we have 8 farmers from around the world, or who have immigrated to the United States from around the world, who are growing organic vegetables underneath and around our array. It's been really exciting. Next slide, please. Just as a quick overview, so again, we've talked about maybe, or you can maybe think about transmission connected very, very large projects, but community solar is kind of where our bread and butter has been. That's why we have so many projects, but most of our projects are between 8 and 20 acres. And the way community solar works is that it's mainly targeted at different either companies or individuals or municipalities who want to participate in renewable energy, but might not own their roof. They might have a roof that's shaded or not be in an area that makes sense for solar, or they might just not have the upfront money to want to buy the system. And this allows them to essentially benefit from a system that is built elsewhere. The sizes are often, again, smaller than some of the utility scale projects. We're looking at, a 1 to a 10 megawatt project, something in the 7 to 70 acre range. And almost exclusively, these are locally permitted projects. So I've gotten to permit projects in probably 30 to 40 different jurisdictions at this point. So I've seen a whole lot of different ordinances, and that's, I think, why I'm on this panel. But one more slide on community solar is the next one, please. Just to kind of bring this home. So essentially, the idea is that the utility gives you a bill credit for the solar produced by a community solar array built elsewhere. You then pay for that bill credit to US Solar or another similar developer at a lower rate. So then you save that difference between what the utility is crediting you and what US Solar or the other or the other company charges you. This isn't available in every state. So I saw in the comments that this audience is from all over the country. But there are, more than a dozen states that have this opportunity. It's reasonably bipartisan. So you're seeing this move forward even in states that, aren't the deep blues of California, New York, and Minnesota. Or I guess Minnesota is more of a purple, but you're seeing this coming forward with Republican support in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where they've been talking about it for several years. And we're hoping to get it across the finish line in coming years. But this is a way for, again, more folks to participate in solar and more local jurisdictions to have a say in kind of how these projects are developed. And one more slide, please, for me. So wanting to bring in kind of my takes on permitting, since I know this is a permitting focused webinar. So the pieces that I would kind of want to leave you with, and again, I'm happy to talk about this more in Q&A, but consistency matters a ton. We've gotten really lucky in the upper Midwest that we've have a really strong local environmental nonprofit group called Great Plains Institute, who's worked on kind of a model ordinance that has been adopted by and large by a lot of communities. They tweak it to kind of have their own flavor to it, but the underlying base is the same, which makes it really easy to come in and have a pretty productive conversation from the start. But a couple of notes that do tend to come up for the kind of 4 or 5 big areas. Setbacks. Solar and wind are not the same thing, right? You don't necessarily need 1,000-foot setback for solar because you can't see it from miles and miles away. This doesn't come up super often, but I've had a couple of jurisdictions really kind of push for 1,000-foot setback from the road, which is just pushing an array into, deeper and deeper into the farm field, which can also be really awkward for the farmer. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Also, just stipulating in your ordinance what the setback is from, whether it is from a property line, from the nearest building, or from the nearest habitable building, and whether that is going to the fence or the module itself. That kind of detail really is important and gets makes it so there aren't any hurt feelings when those interpretations are made later. Decommissioning, I know Omar talked about this. We have it built into our lease agreement, but I highly recommend, as a good example, looking at Illinois' Agricultural Impact Mitigation Agreement. This sets just a baseline standard of how much is paid into the account at different time periods within a project's life cycle. It just keeps the consistency, so you're not spending time bickering over how much money it should be per megawatt, how much it shouldn't be. If you have that consistency from the start, it makes things a lot easier in terms of conversations between the developer, the community, and the regulatory body. Screening, this is one that's really tough, because I know this is going to be somewhat subjective. But also, when we talk to some of the farming communities we're in, a lot of those farmers don't want us to plant a whole bunch of trees in the middle of their field, because it makes it really hard to convert back to agriculture later. And then even if we do plant those trees, you end up with some neighbors who are bickering over what the opacity is of that screening. That's not saying you shouldn't do screening of some kind, but I think setting expectations of what that screening is trying to do, what type of screening it's going to be, and what kind of cadence has to be planted on can be important, again, setting those expectations. Sometimes if you can have the public see sheep on a site, for example, though, that's also something that they want to see. They don't want that to be screened away. Or one unfortunate example we've had in a jurisdiction here in Minnesota is we were forced to put up a 1,000-foot long, 8-foot tall white vinyl fence. Once it was installed, was the only time the neighbors complained about it, and we had to respond, well, this was the exact thing, the exact model, the exact color that we were obliged to by the local ordinance. So again, thinking about how screening is going to be utilized, what's going to look like long term is really important. And then that kind of relates to public input. Where's it coming in? How's it going to impact things? An interesting example here is in Ohio, their state siting board allows neighbor opposition to be a grounds for denying a project. Is that appropriate or not? Just kind of think about that in your jurisdiction. For a lot of the farmers we work with, they look at this as a landowner rights issue, and a neighbor telling them that they can't use their land in that way is really challenging for them when they're thinking about landowner rights and how they should or shouldn't be able to use their land. But public input should definitely be present. We definitely want to hear it, but how is it being used in the decision-making process? And my final note, because I know I'm taking up a little bit of time here, is flexibility. My one example here is we had a jurisdiction who only allowed us to put in pollinator habitat, which is fine. That's our base that we already have on all of our installations in the upper Midwest. But when we wanted to add crop production to our site, we actually had to go re-permit the project because crop production wasn't allowed within the vegetation management structure of the ordinance. So I would maybe consider leaving some flexibility, maybe setting a floor of what your vegetation management has to be. It can't just be turf grass, or it can't be gravel, whatever else, but leaving some flexibility if you want to add in some of these newer elements of the market, whether it's livestock grazing, crop production, so you don't have to go back and kind of relitigate something for an activity that is candidly rather desirable. So that's where I think I leave it. I think I have a thank you slide next, but I'm really excited for the Q&A. I'm happy to talk about this, but I'm excited to have so many of you here to talk about how to get everyone on the same page as permitting. It really makes it a lot smoother for everybody when you have this forethought. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. And then we are going to just jump back a little bit in our slides. Apologies for the flashing. And we are now joined by Tom, who is going to talk some of the just preparing at the community level for large scale solar.
Thanks, Sarah, and sorry for the snafu about getting into the Zoom meeting here. So again, apologies for that. The aspect that I wanted to talk about here today was how to do the preparation ahead of time. And I appreciate Amar and Peter talking about some of the things that we're getting into in that regard. The position that I take representing the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, wearing that hat, is how to work at the community level and how to get communities prepped and ready for this type of energy development as it's taking place. The stand that we take is we're not pro, we're not con, so it's not solar good, solar bad. We're trying to take a middle road in that overall process. So it's an educational effort, and we find that in many communities, the education and trying to help people understand what change can look like in a positive sort of way, and some of the implications of that change and how to deal with some of the challenges that might come from it is really a very important part of it. What we do is we do a number of things. Number one is we do a 3-hour deep dive. We find that to be very informational and very helpful for local municipal officials. And then we do a very extensive follow-up, so help them to work through some of the ordinances, some of the comments that I just heard Amar and Peter talk about. A lot of different commentary will come back from those type of sessions, and townships, local townships would like to do a deeper dive, and they'd like to do that with somebody that might not be their solicitor or that doesn't have a lot of experience in that regard, which we often find, or might not be with one of the energy companies. So we kind of play a middle of the ground, middle of the type of conversation as it pertains to this type of development. Next slide. So what we find often is, as you can well imagine, and you well know if you're embedded in one of these conversations, is this is really a conversation about change. And very often there's just not a lot of dialogue that goes on before that change happens. Company knocks at the door, says we'd like to build a project. And sometimes, most often, we find communities are just not prepared for that. So whether it's wind or solar or shale gas development, whatever it might be, new warehouses going in, again, that all represents change, and communities that aren't up to speed and aren't really necessarily wired for that. So we find ultimately this is a conversation about optimizing land use. Again, any of the examples that I just gave just a moment ago. And in this case, how to put together a comprehensive plan we find to be very valuable, and how to build renewables in as part of that, which often it's not in the plan there were the plans that we've been seeing over the course of time. So how to build that into the plans as those type of plans in multiple jurisdictions going forward. It's also a component about building social license. So we talk a lot about ordinances. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. But it's also about bringing a community along and helping them to understand the different residents within a community, the constituents that you would have as to what this could look like, and also what the opportunities that could be found in there, and for them to buy into it. So again, we're trying to build a fact-based type of dialogue. We're trying to localize that discussion, bring local voices as often as possible into that discussion. Find that to be immensely valuable, immensely important. We also find that it needs to be a discussion that's inclusive. All voices need to be involved, and it needs to be an ongoing dialogue, not just a once and done type of activity. Next slide. Some of the concerns that we've seen over the course of time, and I think you've heard a number of those reflected on here, a lot of that just being changed, as I mentioned a moment ago. And a lot of that change is about viewshed and some of the issues that would revolve around that. So people have concerns about property value or traffic, or what is this going to look like on the broader landscape? Is it going to have, some sort of a radical change? And obviously it does. I just heard Peter talk about different types of fence, for instance, or screening activities that could go on, and how those things show up in ordinance language. Those are things we talk about. We give very similar type examples, and again, help townships to think through that and develop an ordinance that not only reflects on concerns at the moment, but looks over that horizon a little bit as we think about some of the changes in things like agrivoltaics, what that looks like now, what that could look like going forward as we see different types of research that's bringing different agrivoltaics to the forefront, even some conventional agriculture that's now finding its way inside of some of these solar developments. So not just the agrivoltaics of the past or agrivoltaics that are most common out there, but also some things that we see on the horizon. Next slide. We put together a solar guide. I think next slide. Thank you. That Sarah was talking about as well. With a group, we put together a similar type of thing, and we think it's important to build credibility with the different voices, different municipal voices, planners in particular, but township officials, whether they're appointed or elected, to have a basis for what it is that's being discussed when one of these facilities is being planned, or multiple facilities are being planned within that respective jurisdiction. So we've tried to break this down into a variety of different pieces. We've done a lot of work with municipal officials. What are the key trigger points that you find where questions are coming up, and try to provide a lot of background material so that municipal officials, again, can work through that and provide some expertise, not only to them, but within the community that's trying to sort this out. And with communities within those same jurisdictions that are working on different aspects and elements of how to build a positive outcome for solar development as it keeps going forward and builds out across the landscape. Next slide. One of the key aspects that we see very often is most municipalities, when they're facing renewables development, just like any major type of new development, they just don't know what it is. They haven't seen one. In this case, they've not been inside the fence. So we put together an immersive solar tour, a digital tour. It's something that we can do online, something we have put together in like an immersive type activity, augmented reality and a process like that, so that people can see forward and see what's actually inside that fence. We can talk about setbacks, as I just heard Peter talk about, inside the fence as well as outside the fence. What does the first responder community need to know? Where should roads be placed? How high are the panels? What does agrivoltaics look like? Where are batteries stored? Any of those things and many other topics are things that we can discuss when we're actually standing virtually inside of one of these solar facilities. So through the use of virtual reality, or in this case, we can actually do this via Zoom. We find that it's a very educational process, and it helps communities to have a much better, and elected officials, of course, to have a much better idea of how to plan, how to develop ordinances, and how to build a better pathway forward. So there's something we offer online, and we offer that in an ongoing way, and it's very easily used in a wide variety of places across the U.S. Next slide. Also, break down solar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I think you've heard many of these components already. So we talk about the different types of solar and what the implications of those might be. Next slide. And as I run out of through my topics here, one of the other things that I want to mention is about community benefit agreements and plans. I think you've heard some of the components of this. Something we get into in some depth, and really what we're trying to answer at the community level, and certainly with municipal officials, is that ultimate question of what's in it for us. Landowners that are leased, obviously lots of benefits there. Some that are around that, some additional benefits, local businesses, benefits there from economic development. But at the community level, where is that benefit accruing? Where are some of the points that different community voices can rally around to find that broader benefit, and where and how can they partner with the renewables industry as it tries to build different types of and different scale of these solar developments here in the U.S. So we try to create an opportunity, as I have emphasized there, that's preemptive, proactive, thoughtful, and certainly realistic. We can't ask for the moon. We have to make sure that whatever we're talking about in terms of community benefit has to be realistic according to the size of what's being built, but also realistic in terms of what could be scaled within that community. But does a broad look at where the needs of the community are and where the maximum benefit could be, and how to make it as inclusive as possible within that same community. Next slide. And lastly, as I'm finishing out here, I think you heard a couple of these comments just a moment ago from some of the other speakers, but we break down an ordinance. We look at the different components that are in there, from definitions all the way down through decommissioning. These are a couple of the key topics or hotspots, so to speak, that we get into, but there's a variety of others, things like I mentioned even a moment ago, like first responder look within these different plans as they're being proposed, or how we can look at some of the agricultural type systems. What are some of those agrivoltaics components? What does it look like? What do we see going forward? And a variety of other things. So we break down those ordinances, we talk about the different pieces. And I think going back to some of the comments again that I'm reflecting on, thoughts that I just heard Peter talk about just a moment ago, but how can we be realistic? How can we find things that are going to be beneficial? And how can we find things that are going to screen out where it makes sense to do that? And how can we think about these type of developments over the course of the lifespan of which they're going to be there? Whether that's 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever that might be. How can we build some local knowledge? How can we put some thoughtful response in? And how can we think through the themes that we're talking about here? Last slide. One of those certainly is in ag land, which is one of the top topics that I hear If there's two that often float to the top, one would be decommissioning, which you've just heard several comments about a few moments ago, and it certainly would be top of mind with most municipal officials that I speak. And the second one would be ag land. So again, how do we protect ag soils? How do we incorporate components in there if we see change to ag land? How can we bring conventional agriculture into some of these locations beyond just the grazing, which some communities may see opportunity in, other ones maybe not so much. So how can we find new ways to bring agriculture or incorporate agriculture or keep agriculture in some of these locations where these developments are taking place? So whether that's a new type of technology or a new type of technique for doing it, or a combination of both, those are things that we try to incorporate in. And very often what we find are elected officials, they just aren't thinking about that aspect because other types of land development or land use decisions are making, again, maybe a big warehouse or a new road coming through. They're not thinking about this aspect. So that's something, myself as a trained agronomist, that's something that's near and dear to me, and it's something we try to incorporate in there as well. So we'll call that the last slide. I think we have one more that has informational contact information. Thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Tom. And just as a reminder, these slides will be shared with everybody after today's webinar. So if you didn't get everybody's contact information, you will have access to these slides later as well. But thank you, Peter, Omar, and Tom. They're all great presentations. As I mentioned, we do want to spend a lot of today's session on some Q&A. As a reminder, the Q&A box is open at the bottom of your screen. If you do have questions for the panelists, please drop them there. And we do already have quite a few that came through, so we can go ahead and get started with some questions. These are two different questions that came in, but I think are related. So the first question is, if a facility is more remote, how is the electricity safely stored? Do you use lithium batteries? And if so, how do you address local safety concerns and fire response? And then with that, there's also a question just around transmission, and just how do you address where power is located or where these projects are located?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in a few spots here. So for community solar specifically, we are looking at the distribution grid as opposed to the transmission grid. So three-phase lower lines as opposed to the higher towers. And depending on the program, you might actually be bound by not only just the three-phase access, but also a utility service territory. So in Minnesota, for example, the community solar program started only in Xcel Energy's territory, which made it harder to work with other utilities. So it made us have very distinct maps of where we were looking for sites. Most community solar that I've seen so far has been without storage. Illinois now has a storage incentive to try to get batteries on the grid as well. So, for the most part, it's going directly onto the distribution grid, and then the utilities are in charge of balancing their own load versus production. So I'd say the vast majority so far of solar facilities have not had battery systems on them. I think that will probably change. Some of the federal administration rules right now might make it more challenging to add batteries in the near term, but battery safety is a real issue, just like any of the solar facilities where you work with local law enforcement on, or not law enforcement, sorry, local fire departments on how to respond to whether it's solar fires or battery fires. Though they are both incredibly rare, it's just like any development. You want to make sure there's an understanding and a training around that. A lot of the battery storage facilities, for example, have kind of an access pipe where fire departments can just connect their hose from afar to inject water into the site, or they'll have a system that removes air from the battery chamber. There's a lot of varieties of safety innovations and changes as battery technology comes around really quickly. I know there's been a couple of very public fires lately, is how I would phrase it, and a lot of those systems are quite a bit older. That's not to say there isn't fire risk in the new systems, but the main system we're talking about out in California that got a lot of publicity was a much older technology with a different battery set that had more runaway risk. Sorry, I'm really struggling on that one right now. But again, a lot of this is, communication with your local fire departments and making sure that there is that training and understanding of the facility as part of the development of the project. So we register our E911 address, for example. We meet with local fire officials to make sure that we're on the same page. We go through trainings, and all those elements are an important step that usually happens after the use permit has been issued, but before a building permit is issued, in my experience.
There, I'd also weigh in on that too, because it's a comment that I often make with township officials when they're putting together their permitting protocols and also their ordinance development. Part of that is how often, what is the cadence of how often that training is done? Again, working off of several of the comments that Peter mentioned just a moment ago, I often find that sometimes townships actually go about that a little different. They ask for that training to be done before the permit is issued. That's one of those places I often, will step in and say, does it really make sense to do it at that moment, or would it be better, as Peter described, between the original permit being issued and the building permit, that would be when the training is done. And it would be for a variety of things, not just for battery storage, but any of the panels as they're starting to be placed. Often what you find is in rural communities like that, they've never dealt with something like this. They may come in during that early construction and they wouldn't know that the panels and or the batteries weren't connected, and that there might not be quite the electrical liability there that they might be perceiving it is. So the training is going to be critical. When it's done, I think it's important. The cost and the cadence and how that's handled, those all would be important considerations. And many, many times that's not something what a rural community that's facing one of these developments has really put a lot of thought into. So it's something we keep trying to elevate it for a variety of reasons like that.
Great, thank you. And then Omar, Omar, if you're talking, we cannot hear you. I think you're muted. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I wanted to add that both Tom and Peter really addressed the topics really well. I wanted to add one topic is in addition to the great communication with the local fire departments and the community, it's to also, in some instances, we've involved the local fire departments in our design considerations, so that when we're designing the system with batteries, we go through design considerations like access, prevailing winds, location of fire fighting outlets, and so that I wanted to add that to the mix. In with regards to the question on transmission, normally for large utility scale projects, we are looking to interconnect to the high voltage system. And when we are siting projects, we look to interconnect our projects to existing either transmission lines or preferably substations, so that we're not adding to the build out of the transmission system. In some cases, we do build preferably shorter lines to connect to an existing substation, but we try to minimize that. So I hope that answers the question on the transmission part.
That's great. And then Omar, we actually have another question for you, specifically talking about the taxes, and just there was a question about
Sure.
what types of taxes solar projects would pay for the local governments.
So typically solar projects, at least on the utility scale side, they pay two types of taxes. The predominant taxes that we pay are property taxes on the equipment that we install, and in many cases we pay the taxes on the land on behalf of the landowner. So if we were to acquire the land, we obviously become the landowner and pay the taxes. And in some cases, when we lease the land, that's part of our lease is that we pay the difference between what the landowner would have initially paid versus if there's been an increase in the taxes, we pay that difference. So the biggest tax revenue generation is from property taxes. The other form of taxes that solar projects pay is sales and use tax on things like locally procured items like consumables, gravel, fencing, any other locally produced consumables and other items that are subject to sales and use tax. So those are the two main areas where we pay local taxes.
I would just add in there, Sarah, depending on the market you're in, so Minnesota and Illinois, for example, also have a production tax contribution that's split between county and township levels. So in Minnesota, for example, any project over 1 megawatt has a production tax calculation that then is split 70-30 between the county and the township where the project's located. Illinois has a similar calculation. It just depends on how your program is set up from a state policy regulatory perspective, or how your tax structure is set at the state level as well. So there are other opportunities, but I definitely agree with Omar. The primary one is on property tax and sales tax.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful context. Another question we have, the person who submitted this question mentioned specifically being in Northwest Colorado, but I think we've heard this applies to a lot of areas where the biggest concern, or one of the biggest concerns they see, is the impact to wildlife and loss of habitat or impacts to migration corridors. Just wondering if you could speak to any projects you've had where you've addressed the issues or the concerns around loss of habitat, or any other information or resources you might have as far as habitat mitigation or mitigating that loss of habitat.
Yeah, I can take that start. We conduct extensive studies, cultural and habitat studies, to determine whether there are any sensitive or protected species, whether they're resident or migratory. And we design our facilities to address, for example, in some parts of the country, we put special fencing that would allow certain species to continue to access the site. In other parts of the country, we conduct, you know, surveys where we sometimes translocate some of the species that are protected during construction, for example, when they will likely be impacted. In other parts, we have special corridors in larger solar facilities to allow the migration of certain species through the site without impacting that habitat. So a lot of attention is paid to these issues in, at all times.
I'll just add one anecdote because it's a Minnesotan thing. So, one, habitat is not, I think a lot of times this question gets towards deer or larger mammals, but birds, for example, and a lot of insects don't really care about our fences or our array. They're actually looking at it as a benefit. So we work with Pheasants Forever, for example, here in Minnesota, who wanted to have a pollinator seed mix because it's essentially providing protected habitat for ground birds with some predation protection. The other one for us with a lot of the pollinator habitat work is Minnesota is the start of the monarch migration. So we saw a huge, we were seeing for the last 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades, an incredible die off of monarchs. And so they started tracking them and figuring out they were moving, from Minnesota all the way down to Mexico City. And now, just as a U.S. solar example, we've privately financed more than a square mile of pollinator habitat in the state of Minnesota. That was otherwise, corn, soy, pasture, whatever else. That's not saying that you should always take away corn, soy, pasture, but your trade-off is not always a negative in terms of that land use. Sometimes by removing some of that conventional ag, you are instead benefiting a different part of the ecosystem. So definitely something we take seriously. The agrivoltaics element is also how we're trying to address some of the agricultural soil concerns. But when thinking about habitat loss, I think it's important to consider which animals you're talking about there, or which species you're talking about there, and there's definitely pros and cons there. I'd also highly encourage folks to take a look at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's INSPIRE project, which does a lot of research on agrivoltaics, pollinator habitat loss associated with solar. A lot of academic research there that you can dig into.
Great. And then we have a question around comprehensive plans. I believe a couple of you mentioned them during your presentations, and just wondering if there were good examples of ways in which local governments have incorporated solar-related policies into their comprehensive plans, or what that dynamic can look like to aid the development of solar.
Sarah, I'll take a first stab at that. We just did a webinar series, or actually we're in the midst of a webinar series with Cornell and Penn State right now. The session we had last Wednesday, we had a component in there about companies that are working closely with their local municipalities to put together broader comprehensive plans. Often they're done at the county level, and they bring townships in as part of that. The examples that we were citing were in that regard. Comments that I mentioned in my opening comments were along those same lines, that very often the comprehensive plans talk about things like sewer and water and development districts and things of that nature, but they don't necessarily talk about the solar piece. So that's something that is relatively new, or renewables are new in that regard, and that's one of the reasons that we're trying to get that aspect brought into a comprehensive plan, because by its nature, a comprehensive plan is meant to be comprehensive. It's meant to look at all those different components and to consider what the ramifications and what the impacts of that might be, positive and potentially some of the challenges, and how to mitigate some of those same challenges. So it might be a solar overlay district, again, in a more densely populated area, or some of those type of components, or looking at some of the more environmentally sensitive areas that a local jurisdiction might be trying to plan around, or plan for this type of development not to be encroaching on that. So all things we try to get in a comprehensive plan.
I'll add one plug again. Minnesota's example is called Green Step Cities. Tom, very much in line, where a lot of it focuses on other elements of sustainability with comprehensive plans, but Green Step Cities in Minnesota gives extra validation. If you have a solar ordinance in place, you kind of get extra points towards your certification for Green Step Cities. So it's something you can check out as well.
Great. And then I think we have time for probably just one last question that is a little bit broad, but could provide some good context maybe of just what are the general trends that you're seeing, if there are specific states or areas where you're seeing a lot of development, or any other type of trends that you're seeing kind of across the projects you're working on, or the large scale solar market as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think one of the biggest trends, and it's not really a trend, it's a fact that we're seeing uh, load or demand growing significantly due to the onset of data centers, and that's throughout the country. But there are concentrations in places like Virginia, Illinois, and out west in Nevada and Arizona. And so we're seeing a tremendous growth in demand for large power demands, where local or municipal power companies, and even some utilities, are having a hard time trying to keep up with that demand. And so we're seeing that there's a tremendous need for power generation of all sorts. And it's not just solar, but solar is definitely the quickest to access to go to commercial operation out of most forms of energy. So that would be one trend that the country has been experiencing over the last few years, and that will, based on publicly available research and information, that trend seems to be staying. I mean, regardless of regulations or decisions or locations, that seems to be the trend that I'm seeing.
I'll jump in with my quick three thoughts. Two on the market side, one on the more permitting side. From our side, I totally agree with Omar that demand is growing for the first time in 20 years, and transmission connected projects are probably still going to be the lion's share of how we're going to meet that. However, due to the speed or lack of speed of transmission interconnection processes, I'm seeing a lot more attention paid to how we can get the most out of our existing distribution grid, just because these study cycles for projects at the distribution level are so much faster. Construction, as Omar mentioned in his presentation, is very quick for solar, but the interconnection process can take 5, 6, 7 years for a transmission interconnected project, or for distribution projects, it's more like 18 months, 24 months. So finding ways to stretch the benefits of the distribution grid, I think, is one way to keep costs down and speed things up. Related to that, I am starting to see more and more states add battery storage to what's allowed on their grid, because it allows you to stretch the existing resource again. If you can add storage to the end of a distribution line, for example, it can often save that utility from having to upgrade the line or build out more line. So I think utilities are starting to grasp more of the kind of flexibility that storage can bring to their networks while still saving ratepayers money. But then on the permitting side, and I think Tom brought this up as well, I am seeing a lot of discussions about prime ag and ag soils. And this is something that's, again, quite a passion project for me. I work on our agrivoltaic stuff quite a bit. And I understand the idea of wanting to, keep ag protections in, keep soil in production. And I think there's still a lot of conversations to be had about agrivoltaics there. Because if I'm bringing farmers to my site, for example, to grow vegetables or grow any crop on my site, I don't want to put them on marginal land anymore. So if I'm bringing farmers in, I actually want them to be on the prime soils as well, because the solar array itself isn't actually taking up much of that acreage. Those posts and the fence are actually not that big of a footprint. So there's a lot of land there that can still be used by farmers. It's just a matter of connecting with those farmers, those farming groups. I've been down at the National Farmers Union Conference. I'm working with American Farmland Trust, building that rapport and getting the word out to farmers that, hey, there's a real opportunity here to have benefits under these solar facilities. Whether it's free access, free land for them to farm on, or access for new farmers, or whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of farming discussions on how solar sites should be built and what makes sense for different communities for what's going to be grown there. Thanks.
All right, I'd say two things, and maybe this is the agronomy side of me, or the agronomist aspect of my background coming in again. But one certainly would be farmers, and a couple of these things key in with what was said here just a moment ago. But farmers as a group, I think, are getting a bigger voice, or finding their voice around the opportunity that's being created with solar. Some would be apprehensive about the farmland, what's perceived to be loss of farmland, but many others are finding opportunity in that regard as well, meaning that you see an entrepreneurial spirit that's showing up with a younger generation of some farmers that are seeing, whether it's grazing or whether it's other types of agricultural production, that can be actually done between and within the panels. So maybe having not seen that in the past, they see that opportunity now, or are trying to exploit that possibility for themselves and their young families going forward. It seems to be a younger generation that's finding that opportunity. And second, I think working at the municipal level, and it's just to maybe magnify a comment that I made earlier, most municipal officials just don't see that they see it as a loss of agricultural land. And to some degree, for a short period of time, it might actually be that. But the reality is well planned, well thought out, and being realistic about what could be, and looking at integrating new technologies and techniques to make something different happen, and understanding that agrivoltaics could be a big part of that solution going forward, and explaining what that actually looks like, and then matching that to that generation of new farmers that are trying to find that same opportunity and trying to find a land aspect to be able to build that farming enterprise. All those things coming together, I think, is one of the trends that we're spotting out there, and I think it's a good move forward.
Great. Thank you all for the great questions and all the great responses from our panelists. Just as we wrap up, I wanted to leave you all with a couple reminders. Again, we have all of the Solar at Scale resources, program guide linked here. You will all receive these slides. Also, my colleague, Kelsey Dombrowski, who's on the call today, her email is here if you have additional questions about the Solar at Scale resources. She is available to chat with you, or to send you in the right direction for what you're looking for. And then I also just wanted to quickly highlight another program that ICMA helps to lead, which is the Energy Ready suite of programs. If you're leaving today thinking that you need to work on your comprehensive plan or your zoning codes, we can help through the SolSmart program to review those processes that you may have in place, streamline those processes, and really recognize what's within local government's control to be able to improve the development and the ease and efficiency of development of solar locally. So my email is included here. Again, all of the resources through the Energy Ready suite of programs and the SolSmart program are also free and funded by the Department of Energy as well. One last thing, just as everyone is departing, you will see a post-webinar survey pop up on your screen as you exit. It should only take about 30 seconds to complete, but we do appreciate the feedback. And again, welcome any thoughts or feedback that you may have on today's session or other topics or items that may be helpful for you as you're approaching solar in your individual communities. So again, thank you everybody for joining today. Thank you, Peter, Omar, and Tom for your great presentations and great insight into how you're approaching solar development and working with local governments. I think it was a really great session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.